my name is Megan Ross and I'm studying a Bachelor of Psychology at Monash University. I was on the VCE Honour Roll of Psychology and today we're going to be going through some research methods, specifically ethical considerations. So in this video we're going to go through the guidelines for human research as in the national statement, and we're also going to talk about the role of the experimenter. Now this looks like a lot to cover, however most of these are self-explanatory and we'll move through them pretty quickly. So for the guidelines in human research, the first one is we need to make sure our research has merit as well as integrity. So we need to make sure that we have research that is worthwhile and is conducted appropriately to achieve our aims. It has to have the potential to contribute to social welfare or individual well-being, and it is being conducted with a commitment to gaining knowledge and understanding. So research has to have merit in terms of it has to be worthwhile, it has to have potential benefit, and we have to maintain scientific integrity. So even if we get results that we don't particularly want, we still have to present these and we can't modify them in any way. Next, we have to have beneficence. So the potential benefit to our participants or to the wider community must outweigh the risks. We can't conduct a study if we have very little benefit and a lot of risks. We should aim to conduct studies that have a lot of benefit and very minimal risk. Next, we have to have justice. The research must be just with a fair distribution of risks and benefits. We can't conduct research that has an uneven distribution of risks, with some populations being more at risk than others. We have to make sure it is fairly distributed. We also have to have respect for human beings. The researcher must take into account the rights, beliefs, perceptions, and cultural backgrounds of all participants. Participants must have the right to confidentiality and must give informed consent. People have to be protected and empowered, especially if they are vulnerable. So a vulnerable population would be children, and we have to make sure we go through the respective channels to get the informed consent. So this would be through their legal guardian, which can be a parent. And we have to make sure that we treat them appropriately. We have to respect their cultural backgrounds and what they believe in. Now we're going to move on to the role of the experimenter. I am going to reference the little Albert experiment here on and off to give you some context. If you don't know anything about the little Albert experiment, please go check out that video. So the first one is protection and security of participant information. The researcher must ensure that personal information is secure and is protected from misuse. So we're not using it for the wrong things, we're using it for its intended purpose. We don't lose the information. We have to make sure that it stays in a secure location. People don't have unauthorized access to the information, so people who shouldn't be seeing it aren't seeing it. We can't modify the information anyway, and we can't disclose it to a third party unless given consent by the participant. The researcher must also have procedures in place to maintain confidentiality throughout the process. So this is during collection, processing, when we write up our review, when we publish it, we must maintain confidentiality throughout the entire process. And we must destroy or de-identify personal information when it is no longer needed. So after we've finished our study and we've published our report, we have to de-identify the information or we have to destroy it. Next, let's have a look at confidentiality. So the researcher must not use or disclose private information for any purpose other than what it was given to them for. Participants must have privacy, so the researcher shouldn't collect any information they don't need. If their favourite colour isn't relevant to your study, don't ask it. The individual's identity must be protected unless they have consented to provide this to a third party. Confidentiality must be explained to the participant and must be maintained at all stages of the experiment. The participant must understand what you're going to do with their information and how you're going to keep it safe. Next, let's move on to voluntary participation. The researcher must ensure participants voluntarily consent to be involved in the study. Participants cannot be forced or pressured to take part in the study. They should also not experience negative consequences if they choose not to participate. So now let's have a look at the little Albert experiment. Now the question is, did little Albert's mother provide voluntary participation and consent for her son to be in the experiment? There's actually some controversy around this. His mother actually worked in the hospital, so we're not sure if, they could have threatened to fire her if she said no, or if she really even knew what they were doing. So there is a question of if she did provide voluntary participation for her son to partake in the experiment. Next, let's have a look at withdrawal rights. So participants can leave the experiment at any time without reason. They may withdraw their data also when the study is finished, and there should be no consequences if a participant chooses to do so. It is their right to withdraw at any time, and it is their right to withdraw their data if they so choose to. They also do not have to provide any reason, shouldn't really ask them. The participant should have these rights explained to them at the start of the experiment. So when you start the experiment, you must explain to them that they can withdraw at any time, and they have their right to withdraw their information when the experiment is finished. Now the question is, was little Albert able to withdraw from the experiment? Now, the answer to this is not really. So his mum supposedly wasn't in the room when the study was conducted, and little Albert was crying, and, he was getting a fear response put into him. And he was too young to be able to withdraw from his experiment. And the mother, we don't really know if she knew what was going on, and she definitely didn't have her withdrawal rights explained to her. Next, we have informed consent. So the participant must make a voluntary choice to participate in the research. They must have adequate information and understanding of the proposed research and the potential consequences. So participants should have an understanding of the purpose, the method, the demands, the risk, and potential benefit of the study. The information needs to be presented in plain language with personal factors taken into consideration, and participants should be allowed to ask questions. Participants who are legally unable to give consent must have their consent given via someone who is legally responsible for them. So participants need to understand why we are conducting this study, how we are going to do it, what we need from them, any risks, and what they may get out of the study. We also need to make sure they understand the information that we give to them. So if we are explaining this to a child, for example, we need to explain it in really simple language. And we should also avoid using jargon, no matter how old they are, because we really need them to understand, and not everyone will have a psychology degree. Now, in terms of who is legally unable to give consent, someone who has an intellectual disability may not be able to give consent, and a child under the age of 18 definitely can't give consent. So in this, we need to go through their respective guardian and get consent from them. Now, the question is, did little Albert's mother understand the risks? So did she really give informed consent for her son to participate? The answer to this is we don't actually think so. She may have consented and said, yes, you can experiment on my son, but did she really understand the risks and the benefit? Did she really understand what they were doing and why? Maybe if she understood this, she wouldn't have given consent. So even if someone says yes to the experiment, they have to give informed consent. They have to understand what they are saying yes to. Next, let's have a look at the use of deception. So this is when a participant is deliberately misinformed or not fully informed about the aim of some aspect of the experiment. So in some cases, this can be necessary. However, it does violate our previous one we looked at, which is informed consent. Now, if we are going to deceive participants for a reason, it has to be approved by an ethics board. All experiments should be approved by an ethics board anyway, but we do need to tell them that we are going to use deception. And we must clarify why we are doing this. If we're looking about an experiment about conformity, we probably can't inform the participant, because then they may act in the way that we think we want them to, and they may act out in a way that they may not normally. So in an experiment like that, we may not be able to give them informed consent. However, we need to make sure that we debrief the participants straight after. So let's move on to that. So debriefing. So this is clarifying every participant's understanding of the nature of the experiment as soon as possible after it has been conducted. So we must disclose the true purpose of the experiment and why deception was necessary. We must also correct any mistakes or perceptions that they may have, and we should allow them to ask questions. We also must address any harm and check the well-being of each participant. So again, with our study on conformity, we must tell them that we were conducting a study on conformity, and we have to tell them why we deceived them. We also have to correct any mistakes, saying that wasn't what happened, this was exactly what happened, and this is why we did it. They should be allowed to ask questions about why we used deception or what we found, all that kind of stuff. And we also have to address them well-being at the end of the experiment. Do they need to see a counsellor? Do they need a mental health assessment? Kind of things like that.